Our notionally heroic squad of goblins. Um, yeah, Haven's lovely, really good. Have discovered two things in short order. Sings to Trees, who is a very unusual elf, who's basically an elf veterinarian for magical creatures, and a human village full of dead people, all of whom appear to have been attracted to some singing. They too are attracted to this singing, and they discover that the small girl, who's the only survivor who appears to be responsible for it. They discover this right around the time the Elven Rangers ride up, and, for want of a better word, nick them.
They were nicked. Nicked
So,
is the appropriate descriptor
so they
there.
are extremely arrested, because obviously, when you find a village full of dead bodies and a couple of goblins going, and a little girl going, I'm so glad you're here, you're not going to nick the child unless you're Will Smith in Men in Black. Um,
Would that they all were Will Smith in Men in Black.
Meanwhile, Sings to Trees, aided by his terrifying skeletal deer buddy, has tracked down the wizard who was responsible for dropping the goblins here in the first place, who has been revealed to be the older brother of the girl.
Dun dun.
Dun!
Content warnings are horror themes, mental health and trauma, socio-political themes, possible feelings. Let's do it.
And now, the exciting conclusion of
Nine goblins. Kung kung. Their bonds had been loosened and they had been given water. When the goblins were retied, the elves let them keep their hands in front. Nasilka debated requesting the teddy bear again, then decided not to push her luck. Do you think he believes us? Asked Murray. No. He has to know we couldn't have killed all those people, and they've been dead for days. He don't have any way to know how long we've been here. Nasilka sighed. Think it through, Murray. He did. She saw his face fall. He scowled. Nasilka nodded. He's caught us. There could be dozens of goblins in the woods, and he just doesn't know it yet. We could have been transported here weeks ago. We could have been killing people all that time. We could have our own wizard with us. She considered this. I'd be surprised if they hadn't heard that voice thing as they were approaching. That girl had a heck of a range. Murray considered this. I think she might have been focusing it on us. When we were hearing it before, it didn't give me that horrible headache. I could move a lot faster. Knowing that your enemy has the ability to focus her powers was not comforting. Nasilka rested her forehead on her knees. Well, regardless, they don't know how many of us there are. They may think we've got a wizard. Oh, maybe Blanchett is a wizard. They don't know. Blanchett focused his eyes with apparent difficulty and said, No. Nasilka forced a smile. Glad to have you with us again, Blanchett. The bear, he said, still on a mission. I'll wait then. He lay down on his side and, to all appearances, went to sleep. Nasilka envied him. A few minutes slid by, and then Murray said, Sarge, what? It's worse than that. It may not matter if he believes us or not. Nasilka glanced over at the tent. Late afternoon shadows stretched over the grass, but there was no movement. It doesn't... The other goblin gestured as well as he could, with his wrists bound together. Look, there are people who don't like the war, right? I'm not terribly fond of it myself, Murray. No, I mean... Civilians. Oh. Them. Well, Sings to Trees thinks the war is bad. And there's probably more like him out there. Maybe not so many elves, but what about the humans? They're doing most of the fighting. They're probably getting bloody tired of it. Great grim gods, no I am. Nasilka glanced at their guard. He had not moved an inch in the last 2 hours. He had to watch for a full minute to make sure he was blinking. So, said Murray, say you've got people getting tired of the war. Then you get a bunch of goblins showing up and wiping out a whole human village. Do you think those people are still going to be tired of it? Nasilka scowled. That's politics, Murray. Well, yeah. A lot of people die of politics. She was suddenly very glad that she hadn't told the elf captain about the rest of the regiment, or about Sings to Trees. They sat in the sheep pasture while the shadows grew so long that they joined up to each other and became evening. Hey, Murray. Yes, Sarge. Maybe they'll figure out we were right and they'll give us medals. It's very funny, Sarge. Torches were lit outside the tent. Someone started a campfire. When Nasilka looked back to their guard, she saw his pupils dilated as wide as a cat's in the dark. It was an unsettling look. Goblin eyes didn't do that. She engaged in a few moments of recreational xenophobia, which didn't help at all, but it did help pass the time. Someone came towards them with a torch. Nasilka was hoping for food, but it was Captain Finchbones again. He did not crouch down this time, but said, without preamble, "The human girl says that you and a wizard killed everyone in the village." Nasilka shook her head. "No," she said. Fishbones narrowed his eyes. "Where is the wizard?" "Not us. Girl is wizard." "Oh, what's the point? They're not going to believe a couple of goblins. If Murray's right, it doesn't even matter if they do or not." "Ask the old man," said Murray suddenly. It took Nasilka a full minute to remember what he was talking about. It had been that long a day. And then she sat up. "Yes, old man. Old man alive. In-house. Old man saw us. Gave him water. And he may decide we're responsible, or he may be dead, but I suppose it's better than nothing. At least he can testify we didn't kill him when we had the chance." Murray nodded. "We told the wizard girl he was alive. She didn't like that." Finchbones shook his head slowly. "It's very likely that you were lying," he said. "But for the life of me, I can't figure out why you'd lie about this. It's easily checked anyway." He turned to the elf with the torch and issued a few short commands in Elvish. The man nodded and hurried away. This left them in relative darkness. The elven captain's eyes dilated in the same fashion as the guards. Nasilka hadn't noticed that effect with Singster trees, but she supposed she hadn't been paying attention. What was Sings thinking now that they hadn't shown up? Would Algol wait until Thumper had healed, then take the group of them to Goblin home? They'd practically walk by the elven camp if they did. "I will get to the bottom of this," said Finchbones. "I don't believe you were alone out here, and I think goblins turning up in a dead village is too much of a coincidence. But there are a great many things that don't add up either. Like our free goblins caused herds of farm animals to trample themselves to death, say. No, I suppose they'll blame that on the hypothetical wizard we're apparently working for." "We are rangers," said Finchbones. "We can track a squirrel through a 1,000-mile forest. We will find out where you came from and what has happened here." Nasilka met his eyes squarely. "Good. Then we'll understand. Then we'll grant fairness, as prisoners of war. If you can grandstand, son, so can I." She only wished she had the words to do it well. His eyes did not look tired any longer. He nodded once, turned on his heel, and left. "Do you think he'll ask her about it?" asked Murray. "If he does," said Nasilka, "I imagine we'll know in a few minutes." Nasilka's estimate was off by almost an hour. Possibly Finchbones had been subtle with his questioning, or maybe he'd sent someone to go find the old human. Nasilka rather hoped that the old man had pulled through. Somebody ought to, or odds don't look like good. And then, just as the moon came up and sat on top of the hedgerow, the voice began again. "Oh, hell," thought Nasilka. Their guard's head jerked up, and without a glance at them, he began to walk towards the command tent. "This is our chance. We can escape. We can get away. Yeah, no, I'm crawling towards the tent, aren't I? Oh, lovely." The really obnoxious thing about this magic was how knowing what was happening to her didn't change anything. She knew perfectly well that there wasn't a conversation. Oh, but it was so close that she'd never understand it unless she got just a little bit closer, close enough to make out the words, that even if she did understand it just a little closer, that it was coming from the throat of a deranged killer who had destroyed an entire village, apparently as bait for a group of elves. I wonder if they heard what she was actually saying before they died. She tried to stand up, but the elves had hobbled her feet with such a short length of rope that crawling covered the ground more quickly. Murray shuffled along next to her. "Sarge?" asked Blanchett, slow and puzzled, and Nasilka sank her teeth into her lower lip, because she knew how hard it was for him to talk without the bear thinking for him, but he was making it harder to hear the words, and she could swear she almost got a full sentence that time. Just about. She put her arm in a gopher hole and went into it up to the shoulder. Murray crawled past her as she struggled to extricate herself. Then Blanchett went past, with a very odd look on his face, except that he was going the wrong way, not towards the command tent at all, but veering off to one of the others. Nasilka managed to think, "I'll never get near the voice that way. Where is it? Oh, good thinking, Blanchett. Good job." And then she found herself shushing her own thoughts, trying to listen to the voice that was almost there, just a little closer, just up to the back of the command tent now. There were elves pushing up against the walls of the tent. One lifted his sword to cut through the fabric, and then the voice changed. Nasilka stifled a scream, and now it was the same as it had been in the church. Now it was painful. Now the conversation was a buzz that was going to pry the tiny bones of her ears loose and throw them like jacks inside the chambers of her skull. Murray, a few yards ahead, sank down to his belly and tried to shield his ears as best he could, with his arms tied together at the wrist. I wonder if this is how those people died. A mountain of flesh passed in front of her vision. Something picked her up, one-handed, and tucked her against what felt like a wall of warty skin. Nasilka's head was hurting terribly badly, and if she could just hear what the voice was saying, that pain would stop. That must be what it was talking about, how to stop the headache. But what is carrying me? How is something carrying me? The creature reached down, grabbed Murray too, and then began moving towards the tent. Nasilka approved of this, because it was getting her closer to the voice, and it was moving much faster than she could. Her captor came around the side of the tent, and Nasilka saw the girl. She was standing a few feet from the front of the tent, and there was a ring of elves around her, all of them on their knees or curled on their sides, holding their head. Finchbones had a crossbow and was struggling to raise it, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't even get it off the ground. There was another creature there as well, like the one carrying Nasilka. It was holding a struggling sinister trees around the waist, and in its other arm, well, she wasn't going to forget that human's face in a hurry. For one thing, he was still wearing a cloak. The girl saw the wizard and snapped her mouth closed. "John!" she cried, dashing towards him. Nasilka's brain felt like a crumpled ball of paper suddenly smoothed flat. The elves gave a collective moan of relief. Finchbones lifted the crossbow and fumbled with the bolt. The large creature set the wizard down hurriedly. Sinister Trees, hanging limply in the monster's other arm, babbled something to it in Elvish. The girl threw her arms around the wizard, John's neck, and said, somewhat muffled, "I knew it would work. I knew they'd have to bring you back if there was nobody else to take care of me." Nasilka twisted her head and looked up at the creature holding her. Had it been immune to the noise? It looked back down at her, had a wide, froggy mouth and enormous eyes. Looked like a toad, crossed with a bull, crossed with a small hillside. "Grah!" it said cheerfully. "The trolls, Sarge," said Murray. "Sings to Trees talked about them. I think they're friends of his. Grah, 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 grah!" "Where's Blanchett?" whispered Nasilka. "I don't want an elf shooting him if he's wandering off. I haven't seen him, Sarge. Maybe he's on the other side of the tent." Finchbones managed to get the crossbow loaded and raised it up. "Sir," he said with a heavy accent, "must move back from her now." Nasilka felt a distinct stab of pleasure that the elven captain spoke this dialect rather worse than she did. Now who sounds unintelligent? Ha! Wizard and girl both ignored him. The wizard said, Elizabeth, what have you done? Nothing, said the girl. Well, I shouldn't have had to do anything. They shouldn't have taken you away. Finchbones tried again. Sir, move back. Now. John not only didn't move back, he held Elizabeth more tightly. Any crossbow bolt would go through both of them, and Nasilka was pretty sure the wizard knew it. I'm sorry, sir, he said. Did she do something bad? Finchbones looked tired and grim. Killed. Village. Many killed. Move back. Elizabeth, the young wizard looked down at her. They wouldn't bring you back. I told them I'd do it if they didn't bring you back. They didn't listen. Sings to Trees put his hands over his face, looking grey. I had to go away, Elizabeth. It's so much better. They explained things and nobody's scared of me. You shouldn't have done this. Finchbone said something to one of the other elves. This elf said, The captain is warning you. You must step away from the girl. She is extremely dangerous. At this time, we cannot guarantee your safety. Elizabeth glared up at her brother. So you're glad you went away? The boy was a poor liar, Nasilka thought. She was another species. Even she could see the answer on his face. Fine, yelled the girl. Fine, if that's how it is. I'm sorry I ever wanted you to come back. The girl pulled back. Finchbones jerked the crossbow up, and she opened her mouth and made the noise again. Nasilka had to give it to Captain Finchbones. His hands were shaking badly, and the shot went wild, but it went past her left shoulder with only inches to spare. And he did all this while everyone else was slamming their hands over their ears. The only reason Nasilka didn't cover her own ears as well was because her arms were firmly pinned to the troll's side. The trolls didn't seem bothered by the noise. They were looking at the humans with baffled expressions. Graw, said one uncertainly. Sings whimpered, and the troll holding him picked him up, cuddled him, and said worryingly, Gra! Gra gra! Oh, we have got to stop doing this, Nasilka said wearily. We know there's no conversation. We know there's nothing to understand. My head is going to come apart if I hear much more of this. Gra. Finchbones crawled, inch by agonizing inch, towards the girl. He was still clutching the crossbow, perhaps planning to bludgeon her to death if nothing else presented itself. John, closest to the source, had gone to his knees. He reached for his sister, but she stepped out of the way. Her eyes narrowed, and the voice, if anything, got worse. Nasilka felt as if a mule were kicking her repeatedly between the eyes. Our brains are going to melt. There's going to be blood coming out of our ears very soon. It wasn't just trampling these. Oh, these people died of this. Graw, said her troll. It fidgeted, crushing her more tightly against its side. Nasilka's vision filmed with red mist. Something moved. It strode past the fire, past the torches, and even through the film of red, Nasilka thought it moved like a goblin. Blanchett? Blanchett was wearing his helmet. He took one more step forward, reached up, plucked the bear from his helm. The voice redoubled. The girl had seen him. It focused, concentrated, and Nasilka began screaming because it drowned the sound out just a little, and that was good. Anyway, everybody else was screaming too. Blanchett wound up, took 2 running strides, flung the bear across the sea of screaming elves, and it hit the girl square in the face. He always did have good aim. The voice ended in a very unmagical squawk. Nasilka considered how long the bear had been in battle. Months. And how often it had been washed. Never. And just how foul it must be. Probably got a lot of Blanchett's rancid hair gel on there too. I don't even want to know what that stuff's made of. Even somebody who had been surrounded by corpses for a week might draw the line at taking that particular bear to the face. I love this so hard. Sings the Trees yelled in Elvish. The trolls holding the Silka dropped her gently and lumbered forwards. The girl's face vanished under a large, hooved paw. Graw, it said. Sings the Trees nodded. John stood up. I'm sorry, sir, he said to no one in particular. I have to take her away. It's too dangerous. I'll make a hole. Finchbones coughed, spat, and tried to say something. His vocabulary did not seem up to either summary execution or extradition, but John nodded gravely. I'm sorry, sir, he said again. This is bad, I think. Yes, said Sings. John nodded again. Yes. But it'll be worse. Much worse. She's dangerous. I shouldn't have left her alone. She wasn't this strong before. He nodded several times, as if cementing the idea firmly in his head. I'll have to take her away, sir. Where will you go? asked Sings. Somewhere far? Remote? John glanced at Sings, then away. I go there sometimes. It's safe. There's no one there.
Sorry.
You okay?
Wrong pipe for the tea.
I go there sometimes. It's safe. There's no one there. That's probably good, said Sings. Yes, sir. John paused, closed one eye and spat blue light. Nasilka cringed in memory of what that blue light could do. Finchbones cursed, dropped his crossbow, shaking his fingers. Blue light slithered over the weapon. I'm very sorry, sir, but she's my sister. Finchbones said something grim in Elvish to Sings. Nasilka recognized an order when she heard it. Sings said something right back. She didn't recognize that, but by the tone, Sings wasn't particularly concerned about following orders. He's a civilian, Finchbones. You can't court-martial him, much as you might want to. John reached up and grabbed the air as he had once before on the battlefield. Nasilka's stomach lurched again as he pulled downward, and the air showed somewhere else. It was daylight there. It looked like an alpine meadow. Mountains rose up towards a blue bowl of sky. Excuse me, sir, said John to the troll. Growl? Let her go, said Sings. And Mathian, you will not shoot one of my trolls, or I will raise hell clear to the great glade. Finchbones looked as if he had eaten something extremely sour. The troll handed her to John. Growl. She gulped a breath, and her brother promptly put a hand over her mouth. Only until we go through, he told her. Then you can do whatever you like. He stepped through the hole in the air. It hung for a second longer, long enough to see John release his sister and for her to gaze around with wide eyes, and then the hole closed and the fabric of the world healed itself. A silence fell. It did not break until Finchbones let out a long, disgusted sigh and picked up his no longer glowing crossbow. Sings reached down, dusted off the bear, and handed it back to Blanchett. And now, he said, I think we've all got rather a lot of talking to do. Three days later, the Silka sat in Sings the Tree's kitchen and peeled potatoes. Captain Finchbones, much decorated leader of elite elven rangers, sat next to her and peeled them as well. Sings seemed to feel it would be good for him. Finchbones could detach the entire peel in one continuous sweep of the knife, which was really impressive, but Nasilka's rather cruder technique produced 3 peeled potatoes for every one of his. There was probably some kind of deep philosophical point there, but Nasilka really wasn't inclined to go digging for it. It was pretty much all over now. The goblins would leave tomorrow for Goblin Home and be provided a ranger escort the entire way. Meanwhile, Finchbones and a small group of his men had been staying with Sings. They pretended they weren't there as guards, and Nasilka pretended her goblins weren't being guarded, and everyone was reasonably happy. Thumper had made a full recovery. So had Blanchett. The bear had a set of stripes sewn on his arm. It was possibly the first teddy bear in history to have received a medal for service to the Elven nation. The Silgrin... Oh.
Oh, okay. Here you go.
Oh.
Medal for the bear. You okay?
Yeah. Oh.
Do you want me to read the next couple paragraphs?
I got it.
Okay. Here, have some water. Take just a quick emotion break.
Oh. The Silker and Murray had them as well. They were delicate, silver leafy things, about what you'd expect from elven medals. She didn't know how long they'd last in combat, but it had been a nice gesture. Maybe more than a gesture. She glanced over at Finchbones. He smiled, thinking, wondering if this is really going to change anything. Finchbones nodded slowly. His command of the human language had improved somewhat from use, but it still took him a full minute to think through a complicated sentence. Sings to Trees had read him the riot act about not speaking the language of people under his protection, and Finchbones, to his credit, was trying. She suspected that his opinion of her had increased radically when she proved more eloquent than he was. Maybe change, he said finally. Don't know why anything changes. Maybe small thing. Nasilka tossed another potato on the pile. I think things will change, said Sings. It's a good story. People latch on to stories. He frowned into the soup he was making. We've got to do something anyway. Can you imagine putting that poor soul in the army? Finchbones and Nasilka exchanged glances. Best place for him, really, Nasilka thought. If your description's right, he needed structure and someone to tell him what to do. Pity they didn't get his sister too, or those people might still be alive. But you couldn't say that sort of thing to Sings to Trees. There was something very civilian about him. Nasilka concentrated on her potatoes. From what they'd been able to piece together, from the old man, and from what Sings had learned from the wizard in the few hours they'd spent together, a picture had emerged. John and Elizabeth had indeed been orphans in the village of Elliot's Cross, until the army had come to recruit John. Contrary to Elizabeth's complaints, he had gone willingly. Not like you could draft someone who can simply walk out through a hole in the air. Elizabeth's talents had been judged too weak to recruit, which meant that either someone had been incredibly short-sighted, or she had been too cunning to let anyone know the extent of her abilities, or her powers had increased dramatically. There were all sorts of reasons that could happen, from puberty to stress. There was just no telling. Frankly, they might have thought that dragging everybody towards you, friend or foe, was perhaps more trouble than it was worth. Now, they were on shakier ground, conjecture-wise, but apparently Elizabeth had not taken kindly to the people who were taking care of her, and refused to believe that her brother would go off without her. She had presumably decided the problem was the village, and if everybody in the village was gone, they would have to bring back John to take care of her. It was the sort of plan a child would come up with. Simple, self-centered, heartless. And there were over 40 dead humans and a great many dead animals as a result. Nasilka pitched another potato in the pile. The rest, of course, was fate. When the 19th had charged the wizard, he had panicked and tried to run. Possibly if they hadn't all piled through, he might have made it back to Elliot's Cross, but the shock had been too much and dropped them only partway to the goal. Probably all lucky, but didn't just vanish in some weird blue space between worlds. Finchbones was livid, understandably, knowing that there was a psychotic wizard on the loose, but they had no leads at all for where the pair might have gone. Nasilka was of the opinion that they had gone very far away indeed. Something about the view through the hole had seemed remote. Hopefully John could control his sister. Despite facing him over a battlefield, Nasilka wished him well. Someone yanked the door open, and 8 goblins piled into the kitchen. 2 elves followed, slightly more decorously, or as decorous as anyone can look with an armful of zucchini. Sarge! Sarge! Sarge, the bear, says, Sarge, I get to take Wiggles back to Goblin Home, right? I've been checking our maps, Sarge, against the elven ones, and our route takes us past a couple of human villages. Sarge, Mishkin hit me. Mushkin hit me first, Sarge. I can't leave Wiggles, Sarge. He'll pine. And I was hoping we might be able to purchase a couple of lenses for the lucky tube thing. He took my zucchini. It was my zucchini first. Nasilka put her hands over her eyes. Finchbones grinned down on the potatoes. Weasel hooked her finger into the raccoon's cage and stroked the top of his head. She dealt with things in order of importance. Wiggles goes with us, now Kitten left behind. Murray, we'll see how it goes. Blanchett, have the bear prepare a full report after dinner. Mishkin, Mushkin, I don't care who started it, it's my zucchini now, and you will both be washing dishes after dinner. She drew a deep breath and delivered the final inevitable coda. And Gluber, get your finger out of there. Ah. Well, at least things were getting back to normal. Maybe nothing would change, and the war would still go on, and they'd be right back to Gruel, marching up hillsides in the dark. Maybe Finchbones was right. You never knew why anything changed. Maybe it was all down to small things, like teddy bears, and kittens, and goblins. Oh,
She loves to kill you with those final lines, doesn't she?
oh,
You're right.
yeah, I'm good.
Breathe. Do you want to try the last line again?
Yeah.
Okay. Give yourself a second. It's okay. You are very in your emotions, and it is okay, and people appreciate it and appreciate you. It's okay. I know. It's been a rough couple weeks, and it's nice to have a stress leak for kittens and teddy bears and goblins. And all the goblins lived, and the kitten lived. I bet the goat even lived. It's just not with them. It's
Chances
back
are.
with the rest of the 19th.
Okay.
You don't have to do the last line again if you don't want to. It's okay.
Take the landing.
Stick to landing.
Take the landing.
Stick to landing. One more for the tape.
Just one more take.
You can do it.
Maybe it was all down to small things, like teddy bears, and kittens, and goblins.